You're the one I want to go through time with.
Welcome back, friends. Play chess. Remember, we're talking about Paul Morphy and the beginning of our study of the development of positional chess. Who was Paul Morphy? Remember, he was born in 1837. He got his law degree at the age of 17. He had a year before he could practice law, so he took the year off, went to Europe. He played all the strongest players except Howard Staunton, and he beat them all soundly. He introduced new ideas into the field of chess while he was over in France and in London, England. He came back, and in 1859. The Civil War broke out in the States, remember? And the strange thing about Paul Morphy is that no one would take him seriously. They knew he was a great chess genius, but they wouldn't take him seriously as a lawyer. His law practice was a failure. The lady he wanted to marry couldn't take him seriously. That was a failure. He became very despondent, and it was in 1864 that we have his last recorded game. And he died shortly afterwards at the age of 47. But he was an immortal chess player, and he revolutionized the game for us. We're going to try something new this evening. We're going to end off our program with a little problem, a creation of Paul Morphy's, the only one he did in fact create. So you get a pencil ready, and you'll be able to mark the moves down and study them at home. And if you think you have the correct answer, when we show it to you, you send it on to our box number, and the first correct answer drawn will win a nice chess prize. Let's get on with our lecture. We're studying the development of positional chess. And what do we mean by positional chess? What we mean is that the scheme of the game is what is important, not just the slam-bang tactical chess of pre-Morphy days. The combinations that arise are not precise. They cannot be calculated in a precise way, the way combinations could be calculated before Morphy's time, in the age of Philidor and Saint-Amand and those fellows. From the scheme of the game, from the idea of the game, we ought to have a superior position arise. We learn from Morphy what the scheme of our game ought to be, which we shall review. This gives us a superior position going into the middle game. Now, once we arrive at a superior position, we then stop and study it, and we look for an idea that should be inherent in that position. The position itself should scream out an idea to us, and we should be able to hear it. But we're going to learn how to look for it. It is after we get the idea of the position that we should find a combination. So what Morphy tells us is not, in fact, that we are doing away with combinational chess, but rather that our games finish with a combination, but they start first by trying to create a superior position, a logical position from which an idea comes to us, and that idea is then carried out in a combinational way, in an Anderson way, if you will, in order to finish off the game. So positional chess, in fact, leads to combinational play. And remember, we said this is the way our own chess careers, yours and mine, the way our careers have developed. We start off playing slam-bang tactical chess, and then if we progress a bit, we start trying to study the position so that we get a good opening, and from the good opening we hope to have a good middle game and transpose into a one ending. Positional play leads to combinational play. And what did we learn from Paul Morphy? We learned how to play open positions. Open positions are positions in which the pawns are not locked up, in which the pieces have free rein, in which the bishops have their diagonals to slide up and down on, which the knights can go all over the place, and the rooks find open files. An open game. We said in our last talk that the first maxim we learned from Paul Morphy is that in the opening, every move must be a developing move. We should not waste time by moving one piece more than once. We get it out to the best square, we put it there, and then we concentrate on getting our other pieces out. We have to have the force out in the middle of the board. The second maxim is that if we do get the better development, then we should look for an open game. Remember, we saw a game in which Morphy, once he gets a better development, he starts to clear lines, even if he has to give up pawns or pieces. He opens up the position once he gets the better position, the better development. Conversely, the side with the worst development should strive for closed positions. If you're in a bad opening and you find that your opponent is coming down in on you, you must try and keep the game closed, play a defensive style game. Too many beginners will try and uncramp themselves, if you will, by pushing pieces all over the place and opening up the game. It's wrong to do that. You must stay defensive and closed if your opponent has the better development. The third maxim we'll discuss now. The side that is cramped must seek freedom, not by pushing pawns, but by exchanging pieces. You hear quite often, you'll hear good players looking over some games during a tournament, and they'll refer to people as certain chess players as pawn pushers. Now what they mean by that is that these people who are simply pushing pawns, they don't understand positional chess. You cannot free your game by pushing pawns. The way you free your game, if you are cramped, is try to exchange knight for knight, bishop for bishop, or knight for bishop, or even sometimes sacrifice the exchange, give up a rook for a bishop. But if you want to free yourself, you must do it by exchanging pieces, not pawns. Let's look at a little Morphy game over here on the board. We'll see a good example of what can happen with early pawn pushes. It's much like the game we had in our last talk, which was an Evans gambit. Starts out like a Jacopiano with the two bishops out, and then the sacrifice of this pawn. Morphy is white. It's a well-known gambit. White gives up a pawn in order to gain space. Takes back, and the bishop retreats. As we said in our last game, in our last talk, white already has a broad pawn center, but he is down force. It's very important to remember that white is down a pawn, which can be very valuable when it comes to the endgame, because that extra pawn that black has can push itself down and be promoted to a queen. So white will castle soon. Black will be much slower in developing his pieces because he took the extra time to capture a pawn. Morphy castles. And the last game we saw pawn to queen 3 come out like that. And then knight to rook 4. Remember that game? In this game that was played after the previous one, they thought they would improve on it by playing this first before this is out. This is an even worse position than the previous game we studied, because this bishop has no scope at all. The knight, of course, coming out here is to push this bishop away from the attack on f7, which, as we know, is very, very weak, this f7. The knight comes out. The bishop simply retreats back here. It's a good place for the bishop, so it can't have that long diagonal. It's all right. White still has a very good. Morphy says, I'm happy with this position. The knight is out of position. My bishop is protecting the center. Black now is very frustrated. You can imagine how he's feeling. How is he going to develop? Is he going to bring his knight out and have it pushed all over the board? Is he going to bring this out and meet the same disaster that he saw pulled off in the previous game? So what he does, instead of pushing it up one square, black tries to free his game by going all the way up 2 squares. He is breaking this rule. He's trying to free his position He's trying to free his position by pushing pawns. Let's see how nice Morphy punishes this tactic. Pawn takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. It looks as though black is getting free. But now let's see what happens. Bishop to rook 3. You notice that? This bishop on c1 to a3 now commands this long black diagonal, which, even if this knight can come out, black cannot castle through check. Black cannot castle through check. That's a very strong square in this position for the bishop. Normally the bishop comes out somewhere here. Morphy understands the position, wants to slow up any possible castling. What does black do now? Continues his development, closes up this. Morphy brings out his other knight, getting well developed. The queen is pushed back. Right back there. Queen to queen 2. Now, as we said, we follow our rules that we learned from Morphy. We now have the better position. We are castled. Our pieces are well developed. We are down a pawn. However, black hasn't castled. He's going to have trouble getting his pieces coordinated. This knight is in a terrible position. It is time now to open the game up, even if it means a sacrifice. The side with the better position strives for an open game. Second maxim, right? The pawn pushes up. This is clearing the road for an attack. Bishop takes the second pawn. Knight takes bishop. Queen takes knight. Check. Okay. Bishop comes up here and says check, giving itself up because queen can take queen. Naturally, the queen will come over and take this bishop that is doing the checking. Now look what happens. See how these lines have opened up with that pawn push? The rook comes up and says check. What is the king going to do? The king cannot go here because of the bishop. King cannot come up here because of the queen. The only thing the black can do is come here. And the best thing for white to do, white could take this with a check. See, it's protected by the bishop. However, it is probably more prudent for white to take it with the bishop and keep in hand a discovered check by moving the bishop anywhere it wants to and saying check with the rook. But however, in this position, black resigned. It's a very good little game to show what can happen. Black tried to free his game by an early pawn push. Morphy then achieved a better position in the out of the opening, and then he gave up material to clear lines for his pieces. The side with the better development will look for an open game. Again, the three rules that a lot of us take for granted nowadays because we grew up with these rules, those of us who have been playing chess for a long time, they stem from Paul Morphy. The first rule, that every move in the opening should be a developing move. The second rule, right over here, is the side with the better development should strive for open positions, and the side with the worst development should strive for closed position. And this last one, the side that is cramped should not push pawns but try to find freedom by exchanging pieces. Now somebody asked me about the game we played last time that was a Scotch gambit and went like this, how it continued. The Scotch gambit is this way. I'll set up the position and we'll discuss it, and I'll show you how Morphy continued to play it. Remember, Morphy was black and white came out here attacking here. And unlike previous players that had protected this pawn, which is attacked twice, unlike previous players that protected it with this knight, Morphy did the ugly move out to the side, protecting it. However, after the exchange here, the pseudo-sacrifice of this bishop, check, the king takes, the queen comes out with a check and takes back over here. This was the position, and we said that because Morphy had brought his knight out to h6, this knight is kept in place, protecting this pawn. That's the main thing. Now it looks as though black has a terrible position. White can develop quite quickly, castle quite quickly. How is Morphy going, who is black in this position, how is he going to achieve a superior position? Well, the first thing he does is he takes aim at the queen. He develops his bishop and he pushes the queen. The queen moves over here, like so. He then moves his rook over here, attacking this pawn. Okay? It's in a very few moves, Morphy develops quickly, and the position all of a sudden has a different complexion. White in those days, not knowing much about Morphy's rules, instead of developing another piece, plays around with checks. Okay? Morphy simply interposes the pawn. Now can you see how that works? The pawn cannot be taken because this pawn is pinned, an absolute pin by the rook. The rook will say check. Even if queen takes pawn, then queen takes queen. The pawn can't take back. Pawn to queen 4. This is the actual game. This was played between Morphy and an American by the name of Meek, M-E-E-K. It was played around 1858, I believe, back in New York. This pawn has to be protected a second time. So Meek plays pawn to bishop 3. King bishop 3. And now, when is that move good? It's good in a time like this. Morphy moves the knight over to get the queen off this diagonal. That's now a strong diagonal for the queen. The queen has to move. The queen moves over here to queen 3. And then after pawn takes pawn, and pawn takes pawn, queen to rook 5, check. The pawn comes in the way of the check. Remember, Morphy is black. Rook takes pawn, check. Let's look at this situation. It was black that was vulnerable. It was black that had the vulnerable position. But because white played around with the queen and brought the queen out early where it could be attacked, black was able to develop quickly. You leave that queen inside. If you haven't got a good job for it, leave her in. Wait till later on in the game before she comes out. The king is in check. The queen can't take, or else it'll be lost over here. King to bishop 2, moves out of check. Now this is attacking the queen, so the queen simply moves back. Morphy now has an overwhelming game. Doubled major pieces on the file. Morphy's achieved his open position with the better development. And he's also threatening many things. His bishop is threatening to come down here. If the bishop comes down here, the rook can swing over on the open file. And these two pieces, the rook can come down anywhere down around here. What does black do in this position? Has to develop a piece. Knight can't come here in the normal place because of the pawn. Comes out here, attacks the rook. Morphy says fine, because the best place for that rook is right there, cutting the queen off from the protection of the king. You notice that? The rook comes right down in there. Now the queen has to move. Where is the queen going to move? The queen moves up here to knight 5, attacking the knight. Morphy says, well, I would sort of like to get this queen off the white diagonal. If I could get her off the white diagonal, I would have some checks in here with my rook, with my queen, if the king came over here, with my bishop, but I have to get the queen off the white diagonal. So he offers his knight. He pushes the queen again. Again, the queen is being pushed around. He pushes his pawn, offers the knight. Of course, if the knight is taken, it will be mate very quickly. If the queen is over here, we come down here with a check, and the queen can come down afterwards. If the king comes down here, the queen can still come down here with a check, and the bishop, the rook, and the queen, enough for a mating attack. So it's obvious that Meek realizes he cannot take the knight, so he comes all the way back here. Morphy, brilliant in his maneuvers. First he offers the knight over here. Now he offers the bishop here for the very same reason. He wants to get the queen off these white squares. The bishop cannot be touched. The queen comes over here, still to protect that square. Now it's very strange. Look how many times in this game that queen has moved. She's been all over the board, which allows Morphy to get all his pieces on the correct squares. Doubled on the files, the bishop on the strong diagonals. The only one out of place is the knight, but it had a good tactical reason for being there. Now this rook comes over here. Naturally, the king will move next for the check, for the discover check. The knight comes up here, and the winning move, Morphy moves in here to e1. Now, you can look at this position, you can study it. There is no way that black is going to that white can get out of the mating attack. By moving the king in here, two pieces are attacking this knight. This bishop, this rook is threatening to come down here. The queen can come up in here. We can easily get three pieces on the knight. The knight is gone. The pawns can advance if it wants to. But this knight is gone, and with the disappearance of this knight, the power of the two rooks, the queen and the bishop, will lead to mate. White, in fact, resigned here, and Morphy proved his point. I wanted to show this game so that you could, because someone in that former position, with black being so exposed as Morphy was, how is it that he was able to win the game? This is the full game, the complete game. Now, get your pencils ready and come over here. I would like to show you the only little chess problem that Paul Morphy ever composed. Here it is on the board. Now, white is coming up the board. This pawn can take that pawn. The rook can come in. The white's king is right here. Now, if you want to mark this down, I've marked it down on the slate. You can copy it. And I'll read it out for you if you're not familiar with how to mark positions down. White has a king on f8, a pawn on g6, a rook on h1. Black has a king on h8, a bishop on g8, and two pawns, one on g7 and h7. And the problem is this: white to move and mate in two. White is to make a move, and no matter what black does, the next move will be mate for white. White to move and checkmate in two moves, regardless of what black's move is. Now, if you think you have the answer for this, you work on it at home, or maybe you see it already. Send it in with your name to Post Office Box 7025, Station A, St. John, care of Play Chess or Cable Council. And we'll draw the first correct solution will win a nice chess prize. Perhaps a scorebook or a pocket set or something like that. I hope you have this position. If you haven't had time to mark it down, you can always phone in and you can get it from us. We'll show more positions and more problems as we go on. If this becomes popular, we could always follow through. White is to move. No matter what black does, white mates on the next move. So all we want from you is white's first move. That's called the key move. What is white's first move? If you get that, you have the correct answer. And so Paul Morphy, who only played 55 recorded games of chess, gave us 3 important maxims of how to treat the open game. And his games are really gems. If you can go to the library, or if you have some books on Paul Morphy, study them and see how he shows you in his games these ideas coming out. Next week, when we get together, we're going to discuss the closed game, the birth of the scientific school of chess with Wilhelm Steinitz. Until then, play chess and have lots of fun.